Welcome to Philobites. With this video, we initiate our journey into the vast panorama of Indian philosophy. The Upanishads are the supreme work of the Indian mind, and that it should be so, that the highest self-expression of its genius, its sublimest poetry, its greatest creation of the thought and word should not be a literary or poetical masterpiece of the ordinary kind, but a large flood of the spiritual revelation of this direct and profound character is a significant fact, evidence of a unique mentality and unusual turn of spirit, said Sri Aurobindo. Hinduism started about 2000 years before the birth of Christ in the second millennium BC on the banks of the Sindhu or Indus River in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. Hinduism has been called the oldest religion in the world, and many practitioners refer to this religion as Sanatana Dharma. The eternal Dharma refers to the idea that its origins lie beyond human history, as revealed in the Hindu texts. Another endonym is Vaidika Dharma, that is the Dharma related to the Vedas. The earliest literary source for the history of Hinduism is the Rig Veda, consisting of hymns that were composed chiefly during the last 2 or 3 centuries of the second millennium BC. 1500 BC to 500 BC was the Vedic period. During this time, it gradually evolved till 100 BC. By then, all the schools of Indian philosophy had emerged and had been systematized in the forms of sutras by their respective founders. Adi Shankaracharya harmonized, interpreted, and wrote commentaries on those sutras with liberating knowledge of the self at its core, synthesizing the Advaita Vedanta teachings of his time during the 800 to 900 AD. He was followed by Sri Ramanuja, the propounder of Vishishtadvaita in the 1300 AD. In the 19th century, Indian modernists reasserted Hinduism as a major asset of Indian civilization. Major representatives of Hindu modernism were Ram Mohan Roy, Swami Vivekananda, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, Mahatma Gandhi, Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, and Rabindranath Tagore. One can understand that it is impossible to comprehend the full essence of a living body of monolithic wisdom that spanned over a period of almost 3000 years. More high-reaching, subtle, many-sided, curious, and profound than the Greek, more noble and humane than the Roman, more large and spiritual than the old Egyptian, more vast and original than any other Asiatic civilization, more intellectual than the European prior to the 18th century, possessing all that these had and more. It was the most powerful, self-possessed, stimulating, and wide in the influence of all past human cultures, says Sri Aurobindo in A Defense of Indian Culture. India has one of the world's oldest and longest philosophical traditions. The canvas of Indian thinking is large and varied, spanning millennia with a wide range and variety of philosophical schools and systems. There is a wholeness and integralism in Indian philosophy. The training of preceptors and visual systems combines rational inquiries, logic, and epistemology in a more complete manner of living. The method renders the philosophical systems, both humanistic and scientific, practical and theoretical, correlating the contraries and thus leading to a right way of thinking as well as correct way of living. Hinduism, the matrix of Indian philosophy, is described as having five tensile strands. Across the sweep of Indian religious history, at least five elements have given shape to the Hindu religious tradition. They are doctrine, practice, society, story, and devotion. Doctrine, the first of the five strands of Hinduism, is expressed in a vast textual tradition anchored to the Veda. Veda means knowledge, and it is the oldest core of Hindu religious utterance, and it is organized through the centuries primarily by ancient rishis. Practice is the second strand in the fabric of Hinduism. It is a practical system. Story or narrative is another dimension, drawing Hindus into a single community of discourse. For at least 2 millennia, people in almost all corners of India have responded to stories of divine play and of interactions between gods and humans. The fourth strand that has served to organize Hindu life is society, which was recognized as being highly stratified into four ideal classes or varna. I'm sure you have heard about the four varnas: Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and the Sudras. And devotion or bhakti is the fifth strand. This contributes to the unity of Hindu experience through time. A broad tradition of a loving God that is especially associated with the lives and words of vernacular poet saints is present throughout India. There is a vast difference between Indian philosophy and Western philosophy. What we refer to as Indian philosophy must be understood to mean darshana. And darshana means the direct perception of truth. Etymologically, darshana means drishyate anena iti darshanam. That is, the one through which it is seen. It is not just love of wisdom, as philosophy means, but the realization of wisdom, truth, and knowledge. So, it is not just an emotional or intellectual endeavor, but the very essence of life. Secondly, darshana also implies tattva. And what is tattva? The word tattva is derived from two words, tat and tva. Tat means it or that, and tva means you. Therefore, tattva etymologically means you are that. In the Indian context, tat means the ultimate reality. This is the metaphysical aspect, the objective aspect. On the other hand, tva, which is the knower, is the subjective aspect. So the knower is usually treated as separate and distinct from the object, more so since the famous Cartesian dualism. But here in the word tattva, we can see that the subjective and objective reality have been unified as one absolute truth. Indian philosophy is basically a misnomer. We should understand Indian philosophy actually as Indian darshan. In Indian philosophy, value and human life are inextricably blended. And what is our raison d'etre, the purpose of life? What, according to Indian thinkers, is the purpose of life? To grasp it simplistically, the objective of life, according to the Indian tradition, is to undertake a journey from misery to bliss. This is a single thread that runs across all of Indian philosophy. All schools of philosophy unanimously admit that a pursuit of never-ending blissful state is the sole aim. However, they differ when they specify what that ultimate happiness is or how that can be acquired. The keynote of all schools of Indian philosophy is Atmava Are Drishtavya, which means see the self. Again, what the self is varies from school to school. Instead of terminating in intellectual exercise, all philosophical endeavors serve a greater aim of solving questions about life and death, man's destiny, the nature of thinking, and the origin of the world. Many ideas hence evolved over extended periods of time. A survey of the long history of Indian philosophical thought reveals such strong and undeniable currents and periods of all conceivable movements of thought, be it idealism or realism, theism, atheism, monism or pluralism, naturalism, and even supernaturalism, that it is almost impossible to pick up any one of these and exalt it as fundamental or basic. It is often said and popularly believed that Indian thought is dominantly idealistic and that there was no system of materialistic thought in philosophy. This is certainly not true, for we have a very powerful, vigorous, extremely daring system of materialistic philosophy associated with the name of the famous philosopher Brihaspati, the propounder of the Charvaka school of thought. The schools of Indian philosophy. The Indian philosophical system have been brought under two main heads, namely heterodox or Nastika and orthodox or Astika. There are six orthodox schools, that is, six Astika schools, and three heterodox schools, that is, three Nastika schools. Astika darshan means those schools which believe in the testimony of the Veda, while the Nastika darshan means those schools which do not believe in the authority of the Veda. The six Astika schools, which are together known as Shadadarshan, are Sankhya Yoga, Nyaya Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsha or just Mimamsakas, and Uttara Mimamsa or the Vedanta school. Almost all Indian schools of thought accepted the theory of karma and rebirth, and the ideal of moksha is conceived as liberation from the cycle of births and deaths. Moksha or liberation is considered the highest goal of human struggle. The three heterodox or the as Nastika philosophical systems are materialism or the Charvaka school, Buddhism with its fourfold divisions. Buddhism has four schools which are Vaibhashika, Shautrantika, Yogacara, and the Madhyamika school. And the third Nastika school is Jainism. You can see in this chart the schools of Indian philosophy. The first division is based on the belief in the authority of the Vedas or not believing in the Veda. The Astika schools, they believe in the authority of Veda, and the Nastika schools do not. Among the Astika schools, again, we find a division between the theistic and the atheistic schools. The atheistic schools do not conform to the belief of a personal God who is envisaged as the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of the universe. And these schools are the Shankho, Nyaya, and Vaisheshika schools. We will see later on that the creation and destruction of the universe has been explained by the Shanku with relation to Prakriti and Purush, and in the Nyaya Vaisheshika explains creation with the help of Padarthas. On the other hand, the theistic schools, they believe in God, and these schools are Yoga, Purvamimamsa and Uttaramimamsa or Vedanta. Vedanta developed into Advaita Vedanta, Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita Vedanta. In the 19th century, Vedanta was developed into Neo-Vedanta by Swami Vivekananda. In the Nastika schools, we find the Charvaka, Jainism and the Buddhist schools. The Buddhist schools are four in number. They are Madhyamika, Yogachara, Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika schools. Common characteristics in the Indian philosophical systems. Here I've enlisted certain traits which can be understood as the general feel of the Indian philosophical schools. These are a sort of eagle eye view of the whole system, and the term common characteristics, as I've written as the heading, should not be taken very strictly, because when we do the schools in detail, you will find a lot of variation and exceptions also. So the first point is self-realization. At the outset, the realization of the soul is a common goal of all schools of thought. All systems not merely quench the intellectual thirst, but also solve the problems of life. In fact, all schools owe their origin to the discontent of the spirit from temporal life. Liberation is the ultimate end. This has been unanimously held by all schools of philosophy except the Charvakas. Self-realization, the direct experience of one's inner nature, is the goal of all systems of Indian philosophy. Every system prescribed its own way of overcoming pain to achieve the ultimate goal. Thus, every human being has to look within, understand his own nature, and figure out his path to self-realization. It's not like this is the only way, it's all about direct experience as referred to above. The second point is ignorance. The root cause of bondage is ignorance. The practice of yoga and the attainment of jnana or right knowledge are regarded essential for getting rid of ignorance, ajnana or avidya as it is variously called in various schools. That ignorance is the root cause of suffering has been acknowledged by the majority. Next is the law of karma. Almost all schools believe in the theory of karma and rebirth, which go hand in hand. Every Indian school, except the Charvaka, accept this law, which states that for every effect there is a cause, and for every action there is a reaction. If a man becomes attached to the fruits of action, then he becomes a victim of his own karma, because it is the attachment to the results that motivate him to perform future actions. The fruit has arisen out of the action and the action out of the fruit. This cycle is the wheel of karma. When the only motivation to do something is the enjoyment of the results, one is bound to be unhappy because he will not always get what he wants. It is the act of being more worried about the results than doing the action, performing the action in the best possible way. So, all schools agree that the concept of karma is the only explanation for the existence of suffering. Nothing in this life can be just accidental. What we are today, it is just a result of our karma or deeds that we did in this life or in our past lives. We reap what we sow. So that is why it is said in the Gita, karma neva dhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Next is psychology. The ancient authors were excellent psychologists too, and many facts have been stated by them long before Western psychoanalysis took over. Especially the yoga school emphasizes the psychological aspect of man and prescribes yogic exercises which are efficacious for curing physical and mental maladies and attaining concentration of mind. The Vedanta schools have analyzed the enigma of consciousness in great detail. They have identified four states of consciousness, which are waking, that is Jagrata state, the dreaming state, that is the Nidra state, the deep sleep state where one is sleeping but not dreaming. That state is called the state of Shushupti. And the fourth state, which is beyond deep sleep, or the state of Turiya. These are the four states of consciousness. Next is moral and ethical teachings. Ancient seers realized that there must be some discipline in our life with relation to family, society, and nation, for without law and order, the world becomes disorganized, resulting in misery. Emotions need to be disciplined and channeled correctly. Disciplines related to the body and mind also fall within this ethical harmony. In this context, we can mention the yama and niyama, which are mentioned in the Patanjala Yoga Sutra, which fall under this category of moral and ethical teachings. The practical systems of Indian philosophy are based on these laws. These are commitments, not commandments, accepted to create external peace without which there can be no internal tranquility. Thus, all founders of different schools of thought have laid exclusive emphasis on the reformation of the society and also the self, albeit in varying methods and degrees. Indian philosophy is often described as pessimistic, at least apparently so. Insofar as they originate in dissatisfaction with the present materialistic world, yes, you can say that they are pessimistic. But it is indeed that this sort of pessimistic approach serves as a spur and leads to the destination. Just like the Arjuna Vishada Yoga in the Gita led him to a state of bliss at the end. Hence, pessimism is indispensable for progress in life, and this is what has been recognized by the schools of Indian philosophy. To quote, Indian thinkers are pessimistic insofar as they look upon the world order as evil, painful, and a lie. They're optimistic since they feel that there is a way out of it into the realm of truth. The next characteristic which qualifies the schools of Indian philosophy is that of direct experience. to solve questions related to the nature of life, death, birth, and cosmic or individual existence. The ancient sages started making rational inquiries and observations. Unable to find satisfactory answers, they discovered various methods of meditation that help one to attain higher levels of consciousness in which one may directly experience the truth. Each school originated with an enlightened teacher who described his experience of truth and the method of attaining it. The seers of ancient India had, in their experiments and efforts at spiritual training and the conquest of the body, perfected a discovery which, in its importance to the future of human knowledge, dwarfs the divinations of Newton and Galileo. Even the discovery of the inductive and experimental method in science was not more momentous. This has been said by Sri Aurobindo in the Upanishads. Next is respect for authority. Respect for sages and ancient scriptures is a strong tradition in India. When a teacher advocates a new philosophical system, he cites established scriptures or the writings of authorized sages to support his statements. The Astika or the orthodox schools always refer to the Veda to support their theories, whereas the Nastika or unorthodox schools follow the authority of their founder. Harmony among schools. The systems of Indian philosophy have a unique quality of cooperating with one another. During a debate, the intent is not to destroy another's philosophy, but to clarify one's own theories and thoughts. This has enabled various schools to live in harmony. Indian philosophers realized that every human mind is unique and it must be allowed to follow a philosophy of its choice. Parallel growth and coexistence of various schools. The various systems of philosophy flourished and grew simultaneously. The reason is that the open-minded approach attracted students of various hues who were impressed with the practical aspects of that system of philosophy. When a teacher delivered a message, it was studied and teachings were put into practice by a group of people whom it suited. Thus, a school of thought was developed. The apparently different systems continued to coexist because they provided a theoretical and practical philosophy to meet the intellectual and emotional needs of the students at different levels of realization. Thus, we find Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Shaktism, Shaktaism throughout India. The five schools of Vedanta exist even today. All these systems continue to undergo change and grew to meet the needs of the modern men without deviating from the basic teachings of their founders. Followers of a sect do not fight with each other. Instead, a student of another school is to be defeated on the strength of intellectual arguments rather than by brute force. The support of logic and reasoning. Direct experience is the foundation of Indian philosophy, but reason and logic are the chief tools that enable the system to develop and grow. The theories are presented in a way that a rational mind can easily accept. All systems of Indian philosophy apply the methods of logic to argue their points of view and to protect themselves from criticism. This reason only justifies what intuition or experience has already revealed. By virtue of being an important part of our philosophy, logic got ingrained in the Indian mind. The belief of eternity. Each system of Indian philosophy proclaims that there is an eternal consciousness in man, and the realization of this consciousness is the goal of life. Imperfections are a result of ignorance and are on the surface of our personality. But what needs to be done is to discover the self within, which lies in a perfect state of bliss. Man's physical existence depends on his karma, but the center of his life is eternal. The acknowledgement of suffering. Most quests for self-realization start with the reason for pain and suffering. The goal of each system is to overcome suffering. Buddha began his philosophy by saying there is suffering. Next, he dictated that there is a cause for it and there is a state in which the suffering ceases. And finally, he said that there is a way to attain freedom from this pain and suffering. These statements were called the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. The pain and suffering are due to our inability to experience the inner self. One suffers because of one's attachment to objects. The moment we start looking within, freedom from pain gets initiated. The same acknowledgement of inevitable pain has been made by the Nyayikas and the yoga schools. Nothing can be more wrong than branding Indian philosophy as a sort of escapism. It accepts life in its true color of black and white, but it also discusses so many ways to overcome the shades of darkness so that man can be truly blissful. Practicality. The systems of Indian philosophy contain a practical aspect called sadhana. Thus, the theoretical aspects of philosophy can be applied to everyday life. The ancient sages believed that any philosophy that did not enable man to handle the problems of day-to-day life was of no use. People who have read the Bhagavad Gita would agree that this holy book is not just about religion, but tells us how to handle the crests and the troughs of life. Hinduism, which is the most skeptical and the most believing of all, the most skeptical because it is questioned and experimented the most believing because it has the deepest experience and the most varied and positive spiritual knowledge, that wider Hinduism, which is not a dogma or a combination of dogmas, but a law of life, which is not a social framework, but the spirit of a past and future social evolution, which rejects nothing but insists on testing and experiencing everything. And when tested and experienced, turning into the soul's uses. In this Hinduism, we find the basis of future world religion. This Sanatana Dharma has many scriptures: the Veda, the Vedanta, the Gita, the Upanishads, the Darshanas, the Puranas, the Tantra. But its real, the most authoritative scripture is in the heart, in which the eternal has his dwelling. Before I end this video, I want to share with you some quotes from some of the most brilliant minds of humanity on Hinduism, Vedas, and the Upanishads. India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most instructive materials in the history of man are treasured up in India only, said Mark Twain. If I were asked under what sky the human mind has most fully developed some of its choicest gifts, has most deeply pondered on the greatest problems of life, and has found solutions, I should point to India, said Max Muller. I go to the Upanishads to ask questions, said Niels Bohr. From the Vedas, we learn a practical art of surgery, medicine, music, and house building, under which mechanized art is included. They are encyclopedias of every aspect of life, culture, religion, science, ethics, law, cosmology, and meteorology, said William James. Vedanta teaches that consciousness is singular. All happenings are played out in one universal consciousness, and there is no multiplicity of selves, said Erwin Schrödinger. Vedas are the most rewarding and most elevating book which can be possible in the world, said Arthur Schopenhauer. The Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite number of deaths and rebirths. It is the only religion in which the time scales correspond to those of modern scientific cosmology. Its cycles run from our ordinary day and night to a day and night of Brahma, 8.64 billion years long, longer than the age of the earth or the sun and about half the time since the Big Bang, said Carl Sagan. Access to Vedas is the greatest privilege this century may claim over all previous centuries, said Robert Oppenheimer. All perceptible matter comes from a primary substance or tenuity beyond conception, filling all space, the akasha, or aluminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force, calling into existence in never-ending cycles all things and phenomena, said Nikola Tesla. It is true that even across the Himalayan barrier, India has sent to the West such gifts as grammar and logic, philosophy and fables, hypnotism and chess, and above all, numerals and the decimal system, said Will Durant. After the conversations about Indian philosophy, some of the ideas of quantum physics that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much more sense, said Werner Heisenberg. We owe a lot to the Indians who taught us how to count, without which no worthwhile scientific discovery could have been made, said Albert Einstein.